Welcome to this series of lectures on becoming familiar with the cycle of life and death. In our society, there is a growing need to engage in conversation with each other about everything related to life, dying and death. We see this reflected in the media. Recently, a national daily newspaper in the Netherlands had the headline, "Talking about death brings us closer to the meaning of life." How that conversation proceeds depends largely on the principles you use. Do you assume the uniqueness of life, that you live only once, or cyclicity, reincarnation? Today we begin a series of lectures with the question whether and how we can recognize cyclicity, how we can recognize the process of reincarnation. Next week we will continue with the study on that theme. 2 weeks from now we will reflect on the analogy of the processes of sleep and death and internalizing our learning lessons in doing so. And the week after, that will be followed by a study on this theme. So today we will first deal with the question of recognizing cyclicity and the reincarnation process. The subject of cyclicity comes closer especially if we relate it to ourselves as human beings. The question here is, who or what is man? The most common views in our society regarding the question, who am I, and its consequences for the cyclicity of our existence and our mentality are: one approach is, I am my body, and the number of lives assumed is 1. And an example of the consequences for our mentality are that you want to achieve quick results in life. And you want to enjoy as much as possible. YOLO, you only live once. Another vision is, I am not my body, but I am my soul, which lives forever in the afterlife. Also here, the assumed number of lives is 1. And an example of the consequences for our mentality is that you want to earn heaven in view of the afterlife. And the third vision is, I am not my body, I am my consciousness that lives cyclically and has a body as a vehicle. So the idea of re-embodiment or reincarnation, with assuming many lives, and the consequences for our mentality can be positive. Many lives are available to develop yourself, or also, possibly, a negative angle is fatalism, that you have again, unfortunate fate. So also that is possible. If you summarize those common 3 views, then you can see that the first and the second assume man as a one-hit wonder on the stage of life, and vision 3, man is seen as an eternity pilgrim who continues to develop in many lives. And viewed positively, reincarnation is seen as a means to, by reincarnation, to develop yourself continuously. The cyclicity of life and the concept of reincarnation are familiar concepts to most people. Surveys in Europe and America indicate that at least 25% of people assume reincarnation. Reincarnation means again reincarnation, the return of human soul in a human body. The more general term is re-embodiment in a new vehicle or a new body. After all, this also applies to animals, plants, minerals, etc. Karma is also a more or less familiar concept. Its true meaning, however, is less well known. Karma involves the law of cause and effect. You reap what you sow. We hope to clarify that in the series of lectures next month, because reincarnation and karma are twin teachings. We will now discuss recognizing cyclicity and reincarnation in the next 3 parts of today. Part 1 is we will look at the starting points for recognizing cyclicity and reincarnation. In part 2 we will look at the way to recognize cyclicity and reincarnation in the various religious traditions. And in part 3 we will have a look at philosophy and science, what they have to tell us about cyclicity and reincarnation. Now first, part 1, starting points for recognizing cyclicity and reincarnation. Or the first question more generally, how do you become convinced of the truth of something like reincarnation? What exactly is proof? We assume that proof means convincing your thinking. How can we become convinced in our mind that something is true? In our view, there are 3 important aspects on which the belief can be based. First, faith. Second, trust. Or third, direct realization of truth. We will have a look at all of them. First, truth. Faith. Faith is experiencing the truth of something based on your own assumptions, personal opinions, and or the judgment of others. The focus of thinking can be, for example, on emotions, desire, or pure intellectual thinking. I will give you some examples. You believe that your assumptions were often correct in the past, and you estimate that this will also be the case now for a certain item. Or you know someone who often turned out to be right, and you also trust that he or she is right on this issue. Of course, that is a fairly passive way of arriving at truth. You make perhaps unfounded assumptions yourself, or accept something from someone else, often based on a personal inner feeling. And yet, that can also provide a certain degree of conviction. The key question is the truth in accordance with personal assumptions and feelings? That is your touchstone. Let's have a look at trust. Trust is investigating independently and judging independently what the truth of a certain issue is. The focus of thought is mainly a focus on the intellect. When we are able to test a new idea, for example in science, against something that we have already experienced as truth, then we can have trust. We can have confidence in the truth of that new idea. We can then at least experience the logic of that new idea, even though we probably cannot yet grasp the full scope of the new idea, because we have an insufficient and profoundly broad view of it. We see this approach especially in the domain of science. Science focuses namely on the how of things. Science is based on ordered and classified knowledge, among other things, using research and experiments. Logic is the utmost importance in order to determine the truth of something objectively and immutably. So the key question here is something logical? Finally, there is the highest form of truth finding. Direct realization of truth or inner knowing. An example, you may know the stories about Einstein. He knew intuitively that he was on the right track on developing his theories on relativity, even though he initially lacked a logical foundation and accompanying facts to prove his assumptions. Then let's have a look at another aspect of this. Philosophy, the why question. This focus of thinking can be characterized as intuition or understanding. This way of thinking is linked to the why question. We find this, as I said, mainly in the domain of philosophy. If you look at the origin of the word philosophy, it consists of the two Greek words philo, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. This is usually literally translated as love of wisdom or philosophy. Although Madame Blavatsky writes that the esoteric meaning of philosophy is better understood by translating it as wisdom of love. In any case, philosophy is mainly about your awareness of the interconnectedness of everything. In other words, it's about your insight and understanding. If you understand the core or essence of something, you are able to recognize that essence always and everywhere through your insight and understanding, i.e., that you understand its universality. So the key question in philosophy is something universal? An even higher aspect of direct awareness of truth is where thinking is focused on inspiration and the sense of unity. This is linked to the what for question of life, religion. There are several possible derivations of the word religion. It is usually derived from the Latin word religare, meaning to reconnect. Reconnect to what? With the higher within yourself, with your inner source. Another derivation is possible from relegere, with the meaning of choosing the right thing over and over again. If you combine both meanings, then religion implies that you self-consciously, through the choices you make, seek to reconnect with your own essence, with the source from which you spring. Because all life is part of that same essence, religion also makes you self-consciously connect with all your fellow human beings, yes, with all living things. A compassionate mentality, as it were, naturally follows from this. The way in which you consciously implement that connection determines the extent to which this is ethical. Acting ethically means applying our clearest, most universal insights in our relationship with our fellow human beings, the animals and plants and gods. Our image of ethical living will continue to grow if we try to apply that image. For more thoughts on religion, see our recent symposium on the religion of the future, last September. The key question in religion is therefore, is something ethical? I will now briefly summarize the ways in which we can gain an increasingly deeper insight into the truth. First, through faith, by assuming our own assumptions and the judgments of others, as long as the latter are consistent with our own assumptions and feelings. Through trust, through independent investigation and judgment, making use of the intellect. In doing so, logics is an important touchstone, as is also mostly applied in science. Direct relation of truth by using intuition and understanding, where universality is an important touchstone, such as is applied especially in philosophy. But the highest is when we use inspiration and the sense of unity, in which our ethical sense is an important touchstone, such as is important in religion. We can find the highest truth through a synthesis of religion, philosophy and science, because religion without philosophy and science falls into superstition. Science without philosophy and religion falls into specialist and unethical applications, and philosophy without science and religions falls into an empty wordplay, is impractical and heartless. Now, today's lecture is about cyclicity and the process of reincarnation, the cycle of life and death. The idea of reincarnation is closely related to the idea of karma, the law of cause and effect, the law of restoration of harmony. The law of karma is also called the twin doctrine of the law of reincarnation. Both are inextricably linked when it comes to providing answers to important life questions. In this series of lectures, we will focus our attention on life questions that can be mainly answered from the law of reincarnations. In the domain of personal assumptions, opinions and experiences, the following life questions play an important role. Is there a question of fear, of suffering, and fear of dying, or rather peace with death? Reincarnation, a tiring or a hopeful idea? In the domain of science, what is life and what is death exactly? Is there life before birth and life after death? In the domain of philosophy, why do you live? And in the domain of religion, the what for of life? There are other questions, of course, such as why is this happening to me again? Or what defines my character? We won't go in those questions directly in the series. that will be addressed in next month's lectures series on karma. How can we recognize cyclicity in everyday life? Well, we will just give a few examples of cyclicity in daily life. Of course, we all know the day and night rhythm, ebb and flow of the seas, the 4 seasons, work and rest or holidays, and larger cycles such as in the planetary movements. But also we may have heard stories about reincarnations, such as those of Tibetan lamas, stories about important philosophers and thinkers such as the past lives of Pythagoras or Gautama the Buddha, or young children in our time who remember their past life, such as investigated by Professor Stevenson. More on that later in this lecture. And of course also recognizing new self, people, places, situations. That we will address later on tonight. And I guess we are now ready for a 3-minute break in which you can send your questions by email and via the chat. So see you next after the break, after 3 minutes.